Hi, welcome to Proofpoint's on-demand webinar, Utilizing Automation to Optimize Security Operations. My name is John Checo. I'm the resident CISO for Proofpoint in the financial services sector. So welcome. In this age of a globally distributed workforce combined with accelerated move to the cloud and the materialization of a zero-trust security paradigm, security operations centers are struggling to effectively deal with the surge of events. Not only has the number and variety of endpoints increased, but the increased focus on supply chain activity makes for an unsustainable operation. This is exactly where the opportunity for analytics, machine learning, AI, and automation can help stem the rising waters. With this talk, you'll walk away with a better understanding of the advantages and pitfalls of automation in the Security Operations Center, strategies to reduce the noise-to-signal ratio for your SOC analysts, and some tactics to augment, reduce, and eliminate security tasks through automation. So let's get started. First thing we need to do is kind of set the bar, have a common understanding of some terms in automation. There are two types of automations, remote desktop automation and remote process automation. These are very different. If you think of remote desktop automation, RDA, as your Excel macros, or things that you do on a daily basis on your desktop that uses your ID and you control it, that's a very different animal than robotic process automation, or RPA, which runs off, as a scheduled task off a server and uses a service account or a utility account. The security behind RDA is embedded in the permissions that your user ID has. With RPA, we have to be a little more careful about those permissions and security controls. The next thing I'd like to kind of settle on is what's an automation versus an application. And again, this is just my own personal opinion, but an automation is a task that has been simplified, or a swivel chair operation that has been automated to the point where there's no human interaction. However, once we start embedding business logic or decision-making skills into that automation, it's time to look at that again as an application and perhaps rebuild it as a formal application. That way it's in your critical process methods, and it is part of your business continuity and disaster recovery plans. I'd like to also talk about tasks versus platforms. When we talk to automation vendors, they like to sell their platform, but it's really the automation tasks that we worry about. The platforms themselves have their own security controls about credential management, scheduling, permissions to access external sites, and that's all fine and good, but we like to look at, from our perspective, what are the tasks that we need to do to kind of make the Security Operations Center more efficient. And finally, this whole idea about responsible automation. We need to look and be able to build automations that are secure by design. Now, you think in a security operations center, everything is built secure by design, but that's not always true. Sometimes the shoemaker has no shoes. So we have to kind of look at responsible automation from that perspective. So what are the factors that affect an effective or efficient SOC? Well, I kind of call it like the flash flood of security events, hence the water-based theme that we have behind us. First is the all-remote workforce. There are more endpoints on unmanaged, untrusted networks. Our home network is definitely not as robust or as managed as a corporate network. In fact, a BitSite 2020 survey said that a home network is 3.5 times more likely to have at least one family of malware than a corporate network. And over 25% of home networks have exposed at least one or more services to the internet. In fact, the IoT search engine Shodan saw an increase of 40% in exposed RDP ports. And finally, Reuters talks about working from home exposing employees to lower tech threats, including theft or loss of electronic equipment, or just plain human error by employees adjusting to the new environment. In an office, you have people looking over your shoulder. You can ask for help whenever you need it. When you work from home, you don't really have that. Second item that affects the SOC analyst is the cloud migration. As we have gone through this pandemic, a lot of companies or organizations have moved their legacy systems to the cloud. And this can create a disconnected security tool and miss correlations of suspicious activity, because now we have logs that are internal, logs that are external, and they have to be correlated. We also have disparate dashboards. Sometimes the logging formats are different, and we lose that context of our reporting capabilities. Other things that happen is the lift and shift migrations rather than rebuilding an application for cloud native. There's an old saying in the cloud: if your legacy applications have any types of vulnerabilities, the cloud will just exacerbate those vulnerabilities. Finally, there's that hybrid cloud model that a lot of organizations are using, and that again complicates the interconnectivity between applications in an upstream or downstream fashion. Our third aspect here is the supply chain. We've all seen supply chain events in the news lately, and there's new regulatory requirements that are coming out to monitor the supply chain activity. And we have to now train our SOC analysts to monitor and report on those vulnerabilities or those anomalies. That means there's a significant increase in activity monitoring and events, and there's really no standardized or harmonized or interoperable aggregation point for all our vendors in the supply chain. And again, just like the cloud, we're going to have disparate dashboards, logging formats, and lack of context. Our last factor that I'd like to dive into is the zero trust paradigm. With zero trust, we've moved security or reduced the security perimeter to every single resource or identity. And that means we're atomizing the security sensors, policies, and enforcement. That's an exponential increase in logging sources and events. Right now, there's no standardized or harmonized or interoperable control plane. And again, we have disparate data, disparate logging formats, and lack of context. All these create a real flash flood of data overload. So how do we get to automation, and how does automation help us? Well, first we have to be automation ready. That means we have to take some broad strokes to prep for our automation environment. First, we have to document our playbooks. You need to know what you have, what you do, and what you need to do. This is not only incident management, but you need to have playbooks around your typical day-to-day monitoring. How do you onboard new SOC analysts? Is that documented? Is it documented in a way that's repeatable in case, for business continuity purposes? So you have to have all those playbooks in hand. Once you have documented all your playbooks, you want to kind of review, refactor, and simplify them. You want to refactor these playbooks to be more efficient without altering the dependencies or effectiveness. However, you don't want to have every playbook that does the same task listed in a different way. And that leads us to our third point. We need to modularize those tasks. Look for places where the same steps are used repetitively and make them modular, make them into libraries, make them into pieces that we can reuse over and over again. That will help our automation. Finally, we have to look at the decisions that are being made from these playbooks and define them into three different categories. What decisions need no oversight? What decisions need human oversight? And what decisions need human intervention? So that way we have an idea of the impact or risk that every decision that's being automated is making. So once we have all that prep work done, now how do we embrace automation? Well, now let's talk about some specific tactics when we're implementing automation. The biggest thing I like to talk about is defining an automation governance role, or an RPA authority. This is an explicit role within your SOC that's responsible for automation security and automation safety. They own and maintain the automation platform. Remember, we talked about tasks and platforms before. They vet all the requests to automate. What's the entry criteria for automation? When does an automation become an application? They need to review all the deployable automation tasks. So when an automation is ready to be put into production, they need to review it. And they also need to have constant inspection of the automation monitoring and reporting that is done by the automation owner. The second thing I like to talk about is treating RPA projects as development. We need to not just write automation tasks as we need to follow a formal software development lifecycle and service level agreement. This will ensure that we're doing things in a consistent fashion and doing the same amount of vetting. RPA deployments need to have an owner, a developer, a maintainer, and a reporter. Could all be the same person, but those rules have to be established. You also need to make sure your RPA uses lower level environments for development, testing, and bug fixes. Really, really important. We don't want to develop our automation on the fly and break something in production. Our third point here is periodic human verification. To me, assurance and oversight is the key. If you think about Terminator 3 and Skynet, the whole point of that movie series was that there was no human oversight. We need to have human oversight, whether it's an assurance level or actually a verification or decision-making level. Have that written into your playbooks. And fourth, I like to talk about exit criteria for automated tasks. To me, there's two types of automated tasks. There's some automations that are effective for a very specific time frame, usually when you're migrating a legacy application to the cloud or rewriting an application, or some other project where you're taking data from one system to another, swivel chair operations. Then there's longer term automations that need to be periodically refactored for changing conditions. So if we're feeding data in from external sources, we need to make sure that those external sources either use the same APIs or the interface hasn't changed, and that way the automations won't break. Overall, we need to check on the effectiveness of that automation from time to time. So what are the benefits of a security operations automation? Well, overall, I think there's better team time management, which means better team dynamics, which means better security. There's a more effective signal to noise ratio. There's a better balance between false positives and false negatives. Our SOC analysts can now focus on the important things rather than having to hit a bunch of dead ends. And with more effective work, there's a decreased SOC analyst burnout. Those longer tenures means that the more experienced workforce is staying on to defend your network. And that leads to better response and investigation depth. That's less time chasing dead ends and more time spent going deep and looking at those systemic risks. And finally, from a security operations center standpoint, we will have now the ability to embark on advanced projects that we never had the chance to embark on before. The SOC team can look for longer term systemic threats or look for emerging threat actors out there that they haven't had the time to before. So I hope this helped you understand where automation can work with your SOC and make your security operations more efficient. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, jcheco@proofpoint.com. Thank you very much.